So I'm getting a lot of questions and concerns about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So I'm going to talk about it, and this is going to probably be two parts because I have a lot to talk about and also maps to show and things like that. So Russia and Ukraine are continuing to claim some sort of provocation at the nuclear power plant is going to occur in the next 24 to 48 hours. With Ukrainian officials stating Russian forces have placed explosives in 3 of the 6 power units, with new devices being observed on the roof of the cooling units. Russian sources are now saying that Ukraine is going to carry out an operation on the plant tonight utilizing high-precision missiles and kamikaze attack drones. Now, it's worth noting that the plant is firmly in Russian control right now, with Ukrainian operators running it under duress. The Ukrainian military does not have access to blow up the plant internally. The claim by Russia that Ukraine is going to strike the plant is a bit spurious as well. Bombing the plant is not necessarily just a black and white, set in stone, this is going to work situation, in large part because it is very difficult to simply blow up a nuclear power plant with external explosives or even missiles. A Cold War era facility like this, which is a late Cold War era facility built in the 80s, it's particularly strong. It was built to survive and operate under some pretty serious assaults on the structure. The plant is relatively modern in its design, and it has been upgraded when things like Fukushima took place and earthquakes took place in Turkey previously. They have updated the strength and defenses both against man and against nature in this plant. I mean, the reactor components are housed inside heavily reinforced 2-meter thick steel reinforced 2-meter thick containment buildings that can withstand some pretty extreme external events. It was designed to be able to withstand a direct strike from an aircraft or even an explosion, especially after 9/11. These were updated to ensure that a plane strike couldn't destroy or even damage the reactor core. The core itself has a buffer zone, and then there's another 20-centimeter thick steel pressure vessel that the reactor core sits in. Now, the only weapon that Ukraine has that can penetrate such thickness is the Storm Shadow missile with its broach warhead. The reactors are all pressurized water reactors and don't have graphite cores, which could set fire, which is what happened in Chernobyl. The inherent safety design should mean that even if something were to happen, the reactors are actually really quite resilient to any kind of external attack. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, it just means that it's highly unlikely that any kind of external attack other than a massive multi-missile Storm Shadow strike of 6 to 12 Storm Shadows at least, it's likely going to, if there's going to be an explosion, it'll have to come from the inside. However, 4 days ago, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, reported that the areas they inspected, they didn't see any explosives, but they weren't granted access to the entire nuclear power plant. The IAEA didn't share where they could or could not go either, so we don't know what they saw. So I'm not sure if they looked at just one reactor, the one that is in hot shutdown currently, or if they looked at multiple reactors, or they just looked at cooling systems, or they were just showed the administrative offices. We just don't know. That one reactor that is in hot shutdown is the one that is of most concern, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, the other issue is stopping the power to the reactor that runs the cooling pumps that keep cooling those reactors that are in cold shutdown or even hot shutdown. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported that the main power supply to Zaporizhzhia's plant was cut last night, with the facility being placed onto its recently restored backup power line for the first time in over 4 months. Now, the IAEA says the backup generators can last 15 days without refueling, but in the past they have been refueled continuously. The Ukrainian nuclear agency says that the generators are not a good enough answer to provide long-term solutions, and that if that power line were to be broken, the last line of power to the nuclear power plant, the fuel rods could begin to melt at any moment and cause a meltdown. Now, Claire Corkill, a professor of nuclear material degradation at the University of Sheffield, said it wouldn't be as serious as Chernobyl, but it could still release a lot of radioactivity, and it just depends on which way the winds are blowing. Now, Ukrainian sources were reporting earlier today that equipment and personnel with the mobile radiation units of the Russian Ministry of Defense in emergency situations have been observed moving through the cities of Enerhodar and Mariupol, with some seen near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The Russians have also been seen evacuating people from the region, but that could also mean that the Russians are just beginning to evacuate their people to avoid any kind of wartime situations, battlefield effects, etc. They've been doing this across much of the line outside of Zaporizhzhia, including in Kherson, as well as up in the northern areas of Kharkiv as well. Regardless, the safest option for the plant is to shut down all the reactors, depressurize the circuits, and remove the fuel until the war is over. Zaporizhzhia could also be placed into cold shutdown mode indefinitely, all 6 of its reactors, and this was done for the Kursko plant. At the urging of the international community, Russia did just that last year, but the Russians did leave 1 reactor in hot shutdown to produce steam. Now, during hot shutdown, the nuclear reactor has been intentionally shut down and the fission chain reaction has been stopped. However, there is residual heat being produced by the radioactive decay of fission products remaining, and it must be actively removed using the cooling systems. The shutdown process involves inserting control rods to halt the chain reaction and reduce the reactor's power output. The control rods are typically made of materials that absorb neutrons and reduce the reactivity of the core. When the control rods are fully inserted, they help regulate the nuclear chain reaction and contribute to the shutdown process. If the rods are exposed to air, their ability to control the reaction is compromised though. This can result in an increase in reactivity and the potential for the core to once again become critical, leading to an unplanned restart of the chain reaction and potentially a meltdown. Even in a hot shutdown state, which is what one of the reactor cores is in, the reactor core continues to produce residual heat from the decay of radioactive isotopes. If the control rods are not properly inserted, or they're exposed to air, or they're damaged, jostled away from where they're supposed to be seated due to an attack, it could cause the radioactivity to elevate, as well as the heat generation. Without adequate cooling, the temperature within the core can rise, and those fuel rods can be damaged or melt down as well. Now, a meltdown occurs when the reactor core becomes so overheated that the rods or other components start to melt, potentially breaching the containment areas and releasing radioactive material. In the hot shutdown state, the residual heat is actively managed and removed, reducing the risk of overheating and a potential meltdown taking place. You have to understand that this isn't the same as Chernobyl. If a meltdown takes place, there's multiple levels of containment already in place at Zaporizhzhia that Chernobyl did not have. So that alone by itself makes it so Zaporizhzhia will likely not be nearly as catastrophic as Chernobyl, but it doesn't mean it's less dangerous. And in part 2, I will talk about some of the radiation effects as well as the response.